Have you ever stood in the middle of a storm crying out for help only to be met with silence? You asked for clarity, for a sign, yet nothing. That silence you feel doesn't mean God isn't there. Sometimes, His silence is where the greatest lessons are learned. Pain, rejection, and closed doors. They're not the end of the story. They're part of a plan far greater than you can see. Trust the process, trust His timing, and know that even in the silence, God is working for something better. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stood in the middle of a storm, crying out for help, and felt like the only response you got was silence? You asked God for answers, for clarity, for a sign, and yet nothing. Just this emptiness that leaves you questioning, why? Why me? Why now? It's a tough place to be, isn't it? But let me tell you, that silence you're experiencing, it doesn't mean God isn't there. It doesn't mean He's abandoned you. And it certainly doesn't mean He's not working. No, my friends, God's silence isn't His absence. In fact, sometimes His silence is where the greatest lessons are learned. Sometimes His answer comes not in the form of an open door, but in the form of a closed one, or even worse, in pain. And let's be real, pain is not what we ask for. Pain is not what we want, but pain is often what we need. Let's talk about pain for a moment. Think about a muscle. If you've ever worked out, you know that growth only happens when you push your muscles to the point of breaking down. That burn, that soreness, that's the pain of growth. Without it, the muscle stays the same, weak, unchallenged, stagnant. Life is no different. The storms we face, the heartbreaks, the disappointments, they're like that workout for our soul. They stretch us, strengthen us, and prepare us for what's coming. But here's the kicker. In the middle of that workout, it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like suffering. It feels unfair. I remember a time in my life when I was praying for clarity, for direction. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I knew what God's plan was for me. And then, one by one, the doors I was so sure would open slammed shut. And let me tell you, it hurt. It hurt deeply. I felt rejected. I felt lost. I even questioned God, why would you bring me this far just to leave me here? But what I didn't understand at the time was that those closed doors were not rejection. They were redirection. God wasn't denying me. He was protecting me. He was saying, not this way, not this time. I have something better for you. Now I know what you're thinking. How is rejection a gift? Let me tell you a story. There was a man who lost his job, his dream job, the one he'd worked his entire life for. He was devastated, angry, and lost. But because he lost that job, he was forced to move back to his hometown, where he reconnected with an old friend. That friend introduced him to a new opportunity, one that not only gave him a career, but also allowed him to fulfill his true calling. What seemed like the end of the world was actually the beginning of a new one. That's what God does. He takes the things that feel like setbacks and uses them as setups for something greater. But here's the catch. You won't see it in the moment. In the moment, all you see is the pain, the loss, the silence. And that brings me to another truth that's hard to swallow. God disciplines those He loves. Now, discipline is a word we don't like to hear, isn't it? It feels harsh. It feels unkind. But let's look at it from another angle. Imagine a father and his child. When that child runs toward danger, does the father stand by and let it happen? He steps in, sometimes forcefully, to protect his child. And in that moment, the child doesn't understand. The child cries, maybe even gets angry, but the father knows what's best. That's what God does for us. His discipline isn't punishment, it's protection. His no isn't rejection, It's redirection. He pulls us back, not to hurt us, but to prepare us for something greater. Like an arrow being drawn back in a bow, the tension, the struggle, the pull, it's all necessary for the launch. You see, we're so quick to focus on the pain in front of us that we forget the bigger picture. It's like standing too close to a painting. Up close, all you see are the random strokes, the chaos. But when you step back, you see the masterpiece that's been there all along. Think about Joseph in the Bible, sold into slavery by his own brothers, thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. If anyone had a right to feel abandoned by God, it was Joseph. But what happened? Every step, every hardship, every moment of pain was part of a greater plan. Joseph went from the pit to the palace, not because God forgot him, but because God was preparing him. And let's not forget, Joseph's journey wasn't just about him. It was about saving an entire nation. Your pain, your struggles, they're not just about you. They're about the people you're going to impact, the lives you're going to touch, the purpose you're going to fulfill. So what do we do in the meantime? How do we hold on when God's answer hurts, when His silence feels deafening? We trust the process. We trust that even when we can't see it, God is working. We trust that His plans for us are good, even when they don't feel good. Let me tell you something. Trusting God doesn't mean you won't feel pain. It doesn't mean you won't have questions. It doesn't mean you won't wrestle with doubt. But it does mean that you keep going. It means you keep showing up, even when it's hard. It means you keep believing, even when you don't understand. So if you're in a season of pain right now, if you're facing rejection, if you're hearing silence where you hope for answers, let me encourage you. Don't give up. Don't lose heart. God is not done with you yet. That pain you're feeling, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of something new. Trust Him. Trust His timing. Trust His process. Trust His heart. Because one day when you look back, you'll see that every tear you cried, every door that closed, every moment of silence was part of a plan far greater than you could have imagined. And in that moment, you'll realize that His answers, even the ones that hurt, were always rooted in His love for you. Keep going, my friends. Your story is not over. It's just beginning.